we're back.
Back from break.
Back from break.
So when I first met you a few years ago, we were talking about like language. Like even if two people are speaking the same language, like English or Spanish, like what a word means to me might not be the same as it means to you. And that's what we were talking about. Like, can you tell me a little bit more or tell folks about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting idea, but we can go in so many different directions with it. So let's start off by talking about the construct of the fact that we're all living in like a dual reality. And what I mean by this is that, your experience and what you're perceiving, your perceptions are completely different than my perceptions. And they're completely different from Frank's perceptions. And the people that are watching this later on, right, they're having a totally different perception as well.
Are you sure? Just kidding. All right, sorry.
To be honest, I'm so sure, in fact, that now at like the most deep scientific level, right, when they are studying quantum physics, when they get down to that quantum level, quantum particles are all completely different. They're all unique. In fact, science has proven that at a quantum level, every quantum particle must be totally different. When I say totally, I just mean unique in some characteristic from every other quantum particle. So even though there's almost an unlimited amount of quantum particles, there's so many of them, they're still all completely different. And the reason that we have to, kind of understand how that plays into our own uniqueness is that same way. What also means our own perspectives, right? All perspectives are different because of all of how we're put together on a quantum level. To go back to your idea of language, though, and how this kind of operates in that same way, language is different because we're operating in a place consciously where the things that we perceive about the world are all kind of coming through a language pattern. So as a hypnotherapist, we often talk about language patterns. The easiest way to think about a language pattern, though, is just like a narrative. It's a story. And most people then understand these stories from a certain perspective or a certain context. At the same time, another person might get a different interpretation of that. If you use that, though, to your advantage, bridging the gap in that understanding, in a lot of ways, does talk about or speak to what hypnosis and hypnotherapy really are. So what I mean by this is, let's just say you've heard a story a certain way. And because you've heard that story a certain way, that's something that you then reference and you act and believe as if it's real. And so you carry it out. So for example, let's just say we've all been watching the news and we see this story happening on the news. This is what we think it is. But the reality of it is that it could be something totally different. There could be something else that's occurring. And none of us will know that because of how that language pattern works, that system works. Right. One of the great things about hypnosis and hypnotherapy is it is an outlet for creative thinking. It's an outlet for people to be able to expand their awarenesses. And in doing that, start looking at things from sort of seeing things from different perspectives, shifting into different perspectives. So part of that is like understanding empathy, kind of pull this full circle. Is that instead of looking at it from the perspective that you're being deceived and that we want to kind of like break apart the deception, I think it's better to look at it from the perspective that, we can look at anything through a frame of compassion, or we can look at anything through a frame of deception, or you name it, whatever that frame is. But again, to speak to your question a little, I think that is what we were partly talking about, is that if we are able to frame something from the perspective of what we want. So let's just say in your life, Trey, let's just say you really want peace. That's what you want. I don't know what you want, but let's just pretend. So let's just say you really want peace. It would help you if every single thing you do, you run it through the filter of peace. It'll change your perception. It'll change your reality. Now, whether or not I will be able to understand that or perceive it the way you do, that's neither here nor there. But that's like the thing that everybody needs to start to become a little bit more aware of, is that we don't all need to be operating on the same wavelength or the same frequency in order to coexist or to integrate with each other, right? We can actually be having the same conversation, watching the same news. We might have wildly different ideas and yet somehow still share the same narrative. And I think once people can start to see that, they can realize like that this is much more of a human conversation again, as opposed to like all these very diametrically separated conversations that are going on. Right? There's so many diametrically separated conversations, all this antagonistic language. it's because people don't tend to come back to a central point of we're all human. We're all having a human experience. That human experience has a lot to do with the fact that I'm a body. I have feelings because of that body. You're having the same feelings I'm having. Frank's having the same feelings that I'm having. We're all sharing in that human experience part. The narrative that we put on top, that's where people start to forget about their humanity. They start to believe in the narrative. And again, we're back into hypnosis.
Cool. I want to jump into your relationship coaching. So I'd say a lot of maybe mainstream relationship therapists and relationship coaches, they kind of push a model of empathetic listening and transparency in terms of, if I'm having an issue with my partner or my partner triggered me, I want to be able to express it to them in a respectful way, and I want them to understand me. I want them to listen. I want, there's a focus on like being a team and being a power couple where basically, if one of the partners in the relationship is having an issue, they kind of dump their frustrations onto the partner. And, but your coaching is quite different. Could you explain your philosophy on your relationship coaching?
Definitely. So yeah, I mean, my relationship coaching is all based around these underlying ideas about hypnosis and hypnotherapy. So to kind of, this gives us a way to dive in much deeper. And the easiest way to talk about this, and it's definitely what's unique to my approach. So if you go out into the world and you try to find other literature about this, you won't. So if anybody that is listening to this hears what we're talking about and they go like, oh, that's really interesting, I would love to talk to you about it. Feel free to reach out to us in whatever way you need to. But the easiest way to think about this is that instead of looking at it through the lens of psychology, I look at all relationships through the lens of instinct. I truly believe that human beings are running on instinct. At the same time, I'd like to do what I did before, which is to express that a feeling is an instinct. In fact, those words are the same words. So most people are walking around believing that they don't really have very many instincts anymore as human beings. We've been taught this as a narrative since we were little kids, that we've sort of evolved out of our instincts, that now we're more evolved, we're more advanced because we're human beings. We don't really have instincts, not the way that a dog or a cat does, right? Or that some other animal has, where it goes out in the world and it just operates off of instinct alone. Most people think like, well, if I was left to just operate on instinct alone, I'd probably die. I don't have any instincts anymore. But that's just totally not true. What is true is that when you go back and look at the language pattern and realize that if you just switch the word feeling for instinct, you'd realize you're full of instincts. You're having them every day. You're having instincts to eat food. Mm-hmm. You're having instincts to run away from danger or to, be attracted to a partner. So, when we think about it through that lens, that's how I think about relationships, is that we are being motivated on a deeper instinctual level, this unconscious level. And that if we take that into consideration, we can really, truly get to the bottom of what conflict really is. So I think that's probably the main thing that changes my my coaching model from like a traditional relationship coaching model, is that, I think most relationship coaches are still using a very mainstream modern narrative about relationships, roles in relationships, etc. And the way I approach it is from a much more humanistic perspective of instinct. And this is why you're acting this way, because you have these instincts. This is why your partner is acting this way, that's because they have these instincts. And also getting to a deeper level, which is, I would say, a big part of my primary work, is showing how instincts automatically interact. That people don't realize that instincts are a form of communication. And so when people are interacting with each other, they're automatically processing body language on a core instinctual level. And that body language that they're processing is making them feel a certain way. It's either making them feel comfortable or not so comfortable. It's making them know if they can lean in or they have to be a bit more pulled back. But it's essentially informing them unconsciously on how things are going and what's happening. Understanding those dynamics for sure can help you to eliminate conflict from your life permanently. But at the same time, it can make you highly influential in your relationship. But if you go outside of the thinking of like romantic relationships and into understanding that human beings are relational, so that everything we do is based on a relationship. So it's a relationship to your boss, it's a relationship to your parents, it's a relationship to your kids, it's you name it, and everything's a relationship. Being able to understand how that's actually being governed through your instincts, it changes everything. So that's my coaching model.
How do you help people work through their triggers without needing to share them directly with their partner?
Yeah, it's a great question. So again, using that hypnotherapy model that we've been kind of discussing, the first part is realizing that we all have a tendency to externalize our feelings. And so what I mean by this is in a relationship, I would say it's probably the most common issue is the word blame. So the most common issue being that a person is having an experience, and then the way they've interpreted it, the way they process it is they're like, you're doing this to me, and you need to stop doing it in order for me to feel better. All right, so they essentially externalize their feeling onto the other person. They say like, you're doing this to me. So in terms of my hypnotherapy model, blame is the prime example of being hypnotized. Because if you think about what it is, it's I have a negative feeling and I'm telling myself a narrative, a story about it that validates that negative feeling. So I'm like, I feel like this because you're doing this. And now I'm stuck there. I'm trapped there. Now, this is also a great way to talk about what it means to be stuck or trapped, because hypnosis and hypnotherapy is always synonymous with magnetism. Originally, hypnosis was actually referred to as animal magnetism. Most people scratch their heads and they're like, what's that about? And
another new word.
Yeah, animal magnetism. They scratch their heads. They think about it from that perspective, and it's because it's a metaphor, a very strong, powerful metaphor about what hypnosis and hypnotherapy really is about. But then, of course, because of how hypnotherapists and hypnotists operate, they transform those narratives into reality. So then, of course, they like to stick people's hands to tables and to their faces and to the floor. And so then there's this thing like, oh, there really is like a real animal magnetism, like I'm actually stuck. When you look at it from a narrative perspective, though, being stuck is blame. So the way it works is if I think you're the problem, and that's the narrative that I fully believe in, and I act as if that's real, I have completely disassociated from the fact that it could be me, which means I will remain here completely stuck, always thinking it's you that needs to change. And if the issue has something to do with me, which I 100% guarantee that it does, even if it's just, let's just say 50%, it'll never change because I'm now stuck there, right? So the thing that we want to do to break that cycle, to get out of that loop, is essentially, release the blame completely. Okay, so to go back to your question, how can we do this without having to talk through the problem or whatever? How are we going to do it? Well, we're going to bring it 100% back to ourselves. And instead of putting it out on the other person and saying, like, this is what they need to do to fix the problem, if I bring it back to myself and I start analyzing it from the perspective of what can I do to improve the situation, well, that changes everything. Changes the whole dynamic of the relationship, makes the relationship much easier to work with, makes that person much easier to work with. There's so many other skills and tools you can then plug into because of that, because now you're willing to do the self-help, the self-improvement necessary to kind of make it all work. So really, that's the way it can operate.
Right, like looking into inwardly in yourself, why do I feel this way when this person does that?
Exactly.
Or, and kind of taking your own responsibility about how you feel. Now, you mentioned, feelings, instincts, those two words.
Yep.
I've heard you talk a bit about, parts of the brain like the amygdala. Mm-hmm. And would you say, like, where does that tie in? Or maybe not just the amygdala, maybe other parts of the brain. Where do those pieces fit? Or I guess, like, where does the majority of, hypnotherapy take place, or the majority of maybe instincts and feelings take place in the brain? Is it the amygdala, or are other parts involved? Like, what would you say is the major kind of, if you were going to put a lot of research and study into?
Sure. So there's two places in the brain, and you have said one of them already, which is the amygdala. I feel like it's important to point out something, and this is, again, talking about hypnosis and hypnotherapy. Current neuroscience is smart enough to realize that the way that we've been taught to think about the brain as this very compartmentalized machine, if you do a little research now, you'll realize that that's very much so been updated, and the whole brain works as a whole system. So even though we like to break things into pieces and we go like, well, this is where this happens and this is where this happens, and there's all these old school diagrams where like, if you push here, like you might cluck like a chicken, and if you push here, it's like, the reality is that it's all synergistically working together. It's all working as one thing. However, in terms of the function of the amygdala, if we do speak about it from that sort of parts perspective, the way that has a lot to do with hypnosis and hypnotherapy is the amygdala it does two things really well, but it's a pattern recognition system. So if I've gone through something that's traumatic, and in that trauma, when that trauma response kicks on, my amygdala turns on. And essentially what it does is it takes a snapshot of your reality at that moment. Now, the reason it's doing that is because everything now that's associated with whatever that trauma is, your brain is basically trying to say, like, there's a good chance that all of this is a threat. So in the future, if any of this stuff pops up, I want to know about it in advance so that way I can avoid this threat. Okay? So because that happens, though, let's just say, like, I'm driving down the road, get into a car accident, and right when the car accident happens, I'm listening to a song on the radio. Now, that song, it's not a threat. Mm-hmm. But the way the amygdala works, it takes a snapshot of that whole thing. And so now, that song is now intrinsically linked.
Like it's associated with
It's associated together with this threat. And so now that can become a trigger. So every time now I hear this song, I will actually start to have some of the same stress responses that I would have if I was getting into the car accident.
Kind of like a war veteran hearing an old classic rock song and then reimagine. I mean, it's kind of what it's depicted in movies,
100%.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that is a very accurate. I mean, there's a lot of extremely inaccurate depictions in movies, but it is in some ways a very accurate depiction of PTSD type stuff. Mm-hmm. Is that, and it might not be that cliche of like, I'm listening to a song and I have this thing. It's probably more like I'm driving down the road, and while I'm driving down the road, it's reminding me of what it was like to drive down the road in the convoy. And so now I'm in my car and I'm terrified to drive down the road, even though I know I'm safe, but I can't even get in my car anymore because it reminds me of the convoy. It's more like that. Mm-hmm. That, in fact, what I just said is extremely common. And again, this is something that we can absolutely help with hypnotherapy. So it's not that that's where hypnosis is occurring, but it starts to show you how you can use something like hypnotherapy, because it's starting to now get us to what we would call self-deception. So we have this unconscious part, this instinctual part, where the body itself is going to respond as if this is happening. So again, I'm driving down the road, I start to get that feeling because I have my PTSD kind of situation going on. There really is nothing going on. There is no threat. But I'm going to create a self-deception. My body is going to do everything it needs to do to convince me that there could be a threat here.
And that's all because of the amygdala.
Correct, all because of the amygdala. And with hypnotherapy, what you can do instead is you can help a person to reimagine things. So you can help to disassociate certain things from other things. You can help pull those parts apart and be able to see them in ways that don't seem like a stress response or don't seem like a threat anymore. And so you can get a person to easily get to a place then, if they have had those experiences where they could easily drive a car, or you fill in the blank, whatever your trauma was, we can identify that in a way where that part can still stay as a safety mechanism, but then all the other pieces can come back so that you can reclaim the rest of your life. And eventually you can even reclaim all of that, even the stuff that you wouldn't necessarily want to think about or wouldn't want to go back to. I think this is a good time also to point that out, is that sometimes people immediately think, like, if they've had trauma, that they don't want to do hypnosis or hypnotherapy because they're worried that the hypnotherapist is going to bring them back to the trauma. Mm. You do not need to go back to the trauma. In fact, we wouldn't want you to go back to the trauma. So anybody that's worth going to see is going to for sure know that they would never want to bring you back there, and that wouldn't help you because it would just essentially reimagine it, or it would just recreate it and make it stronger. right? And instead, what we would want to do is reimagine something totally different and create something that would make you feel good or make you feel better. But as a result of that, you can really go back and reimagine almost anything about your life. And because of that, you can change the way the amygdala fires in response.
Yeah. You saying that, I was smiling and kind of laughing because if you've watched It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, there's an episode where Danny DeVito is talking to a psychiatrist or psychologist, and it brings him back to his like trauma, and he starts freaking out about it, and he's like, "This is why I don't like talking to you," and he freaks out about it, and it's portrayed in a very comical way, but yeah, exactly what you're describing. It brought him back to the trauma.
Yeah. And that's what we don't want, right? So everything, hypnotherapy is very much so designed in those ways to get you to go back to things or to focus on things that have nothing to do with the trauma, but to help you process it or to help you essentially reimagine it so that it doesn't even affect you anymore. The amygdala also, though, does the same thing for positive pleasure responses too. We can also use it in that same way. So people sometimes talk about how once they've been hypnotized, they will hear that word like everywhere they go, or they'll see the word written everywhere they go, or the object or the thing that they're thinking about. No matter what, it just starts to pop up like everywhere. They just don't know why. Mm-hmm. And that again has to do with the amygdala. The amygdala now has associated whatever this word is or whatever this idea is with the positive stuff, and as a result of that, it's getting re-triggered all the time, and it starts to seem like it's almost like everywhere in your reality. So the other thing that I was going to talk about is called the right frontal insular. So this is something that people don't normally hear about, but this little part of our brain essentially is where we process stress. And when you're able to tap into the deeply relaxed states that you achieve with hypnosis and hypnotherapy, it very much so helps you process stress. And so because of that little stress processing part of your brain, that's probably the most linked to the positive benefits from going into and doing hypnosis and hypnotherapy. Also similarly linked to doing breathing exercises and also even meditation. But that is definitely very connected to what we're doing with hypnosis and hypnotherapy.
Yeah, say that again. The
right frontal insular.
Right frontal insular. You're right. That one doesn't get mentioned in pop culture enough.
Yep.
So, going to bring more attention to that. What's one piece of relationship advice you'd say goes completely against popular opinion, but has worked wonders for, clients or couples that you've coached?
Don't talk about the problem.
Yep, that seems to be a problem for a lot of people. They're like, what do you mean? Why can't I talk about, that's exactly how do I overcome the problem without talking about the problem, right?
Yep.
And so would you say then people are receptive to that idea or that advice, or, once they experience results, or do you usually get a lot of skepticism at first?
I think there is some, I think in some ways there is some skepticism at first, meaning like when people first hear me say it, I think their initial reaction is like exactly what you just described. They're like, how is that possible? Right? Like I came to you because we have a problem, and now your advice is let's not talk about it.
Yep.
Very, very convenient, right? Very convenient. But let's talk through this for a second so you can understand the concept. It's a very powerful concept. If you are struggling in any way, with your relationship, if you're listening to this, I highly recommend that you listen to this and really take it on, really try to absorb what's being said, because it's the one singular thing that can improve your relationship more than anything else. The starting point is going back to instinct for a minute and realizing that when you're in an argument or when you're in a conflict with somebody, what you really are experiencing is their instincts have been triggered, and probably as a result, your instincts have been triggered, or vice versa. Your instincts have been triggered, and as a result, their instincts have been triggered. And the instincts that we're talking about specifically are your protective mechanisms. So you're in a protective state, a stressed state, essentially. And this is the same stress state we've all heard of before. This is fight, flight, and freeze response, essentially. Now, I'm not going to go into any of the crazy details because this is a rabbit hole that I can take you down, again, forever. I've done so much work and research in this place. But it's important to remember that will get triggered into those states. And then because you're triggered into the states, like I was saying earlier, instincts talk. So if I'm in that stress state, it's contagious. Then very likely you're going to become a part of that stress state. And then you're going to become a part of that stress state. And while I'm in that stress state, I'm going to use a very specific kind of language pattern. So the language pattern that I'm going to use is very predictable. I'm going to be critical of myself or other people. I'm going to be defensive, which means I'm going to avoid or I'm going to deny what somebody is saying, or I'm going to shut down and I'm going to be quiet. Those are the three things that I'm going to do when I'm in a stressed state. So if I'm in that instinctual place, it is guaranteed I'm going to do one of those three things.
It feels like those are the only three options one really has, right? And
that's what it should feel like. It should feel like that is the only three options I possibly could have. And it's because instinctually, it literally is the only three options that you literally have. They interact with each other though. So if I now, while I'm in that stress state, develop critical language, anytime I now bring up that critical language, it will automatically trigger you into your defensive response or into your critical response. And vice versa. If you develop language while you're in your stressed state, that same critical language or defensive language is going to trigger me back into mine. So with all that being said, the reason we're telling people not to talk about the problem is because when you go to talk about the problem, you're going to bring up that language pattern, which is automatically going to trigger that person back into a negative state, into this protective mechanism. And because of that, you're going to jump right back into the argument again. Now, what we also are not saying is that you shouldn't process the issue. You shouldn't come up with a healthy dynamic. You shouldn't figure out ways to make it work. Of course, that's exactly what you should do. But there are many ways to do that without having to talk about the problem directly. So if you find yourself in this moment realizing that your go-to is like, no, my go-to is like, we're going to sit down and we're going to talk it out. If that's your go-to, just know that that's making it worse.
Yeah, I've definitely been guilty of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody, I've definitely been guilty of that too, for sure. I mean, the reason that I came to recognize how much of a problem it was because it was a huge problem in my own life. I really did think that you could not just talk it out, but that you could talk it out in one conversation. And so if I was to just add a little bit of extra to this, it's that not only should you immediately abandon talking about the problem, you should also realize that even if you could talk through the problem, which you can't, you definitely can't do it all in one conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's the second thing that most people believe, but is totally a fallacy, is they think they'll be able to sit down and they'll be able to resolve all this right now. Never going to happen.
Yeah.
The Poker Dealer Podcast is brought to you by the Poker Dealer School of Philadelphia. At Poker Dealer School of Philadelphia, we help you discover a path to financial freedom and stability. Do you feel overworked and underpaid? Stuck in a dead-end job? Wishing you could afford your own place, your own car, without drowning in debt or spending years in school? That's exactly what a career as a professional poker dealer can give you. With just weeks of training, you can step into an exciting, flexible career with great income potential. And here's the best part. You don't even have to quit your current job. We offer both day and night classes to fit your schedule. For more information, visit poker-dealer.com and schedule a call today. Your new future is waiting.
Justin, you actually taught me how to not just like the fundamentals, basics of walking on a tight wire, but you also taught me how to snowboard, which has become one of my favorite activities. Do you think snowboarding has parallels to how you approach business or life, like balance, risk, learning from falls?
Yeah. I mean, to talk about how all these things are interrelated, because it's funny, at the beginning when you're like, you do so many things, you wear so many hats. How is this all interrelated? I think that there's obviously some through lines here. If we think about like executive function, if we think about risk management, entrepreneurism, et cetera. So yeah, I mean, in terms of how I think about, let's just take this to a more interesting place too. The way I think about tight wire and the way I think about snowboarding is very similar. And if you were then bring in that third piece, like being an entrepreneur or starting a business, what's really there is sort of the elephant in the room that we haven't talked about yet, which is that you're going to do your best work unconsciously. And what I mean by this is that the vast majority of people think that they're living their life on a conscious level, that they're making conscious choices, conscious decisions, that they're essentially the architect of their own world. And the reality is that your unconscious mind is actually doing all of that for you automatically. The statistic is that you are 10% conscious and 90% unconscious. Most people then get the idea of thinking like, oh, I should probably work on trying to become more conscious. Not possible. It's not how it works. That 10% is fixed essentially. And it has nothing to do with knowledge. So it doesn't mean like if I learned a whole bunch more, I could somehow become more conscious. It's really about processing. So even though that's the current neuroscience statistic, it's about 10%. My belief is it's probably more like 0.0000001%. It's like extremely small fraction. Because again, what they've proven is that consciously you're processing about 16 bits of information. Unconsciously, you're literally processing billions of bits of information. Mm-hmm. When most people hear that, they're like, what does that even mean? Well, what it means is like, if I was to ask you to like memorize a phone number, you'd be like struggling to do that. But your unconscious mind is currently beating your heart, digesting your food. It's doing cellular respiration in the millions of cells that are in your body. There's so much that your unconscious mind is doing and that you're like totally unaware of, including all of the electrical, stuff that's going on in your brain, right? All of the management of resources, you're bringing in food. What are you going to do with all that? Like, we're not aware of any of that stuff.
I'm not telling my body, hey, go send this ATP over here to this muscle or whatever. Yeah.
Right. 100% happens totally unconsciously. Same thing with the feelings though, right? We don't generate the feeling just happens. So when people start looking at it and thinking about it through that lens, we can start to see why this unconscious part of ourself is so important, vitally important to us. And again, to loop it back around to like why I'm saying this, how does that have to do with Tightwire? How does it do with, snowboarding? How does it have to do with business? Well, what it has to do with is, we tend to trick ourselves into thinking we're doing it consciously. So if we bring ourselves back to when we're kids, right? At some point you learned how to tie your shoes, right? Somebody showed you how to, make a loop and a swoop and how to do this shoe tying thing, right? And then now here we are many, many years later, you don't think about it at all. This doesn't even come into your mind. You just do it. We forget that our unconscious self is now doing that for us automatically, right? And that's how all this stuff works. So when snowboarding, we essentially have to convince ourselves in the same way by going through a repetitious process. So we strap on the snowboard, we get kind of used to it, we sort of are sensing the different dynamics. We essentially have to sort of trick ourselves, and again, this is the self-deception that we've been talking about. We have to trick ourselves into thinking, I'm learning this. But what we're actually doing is we're giving our body time to acclimate. And it's the thing that's actually learning. It's learning how to create balance. If you had to consciously balance on a tight wire, never going to happen. Never going to happen. If you had to consciously balance on a snowboard, never going to happen. Same thing with business, though. If you were going to consciously succeed in business, never going to happen. There's this special place, this unconscious place. Some people call it a flow state, right? There's all these different ways of looking at it. But what we're really talking about is we're tapping into our unconscious mind. And it's our ability to do that effectively that makes us successful in all these things. Yeah.
I think one way I relate to this as a instructor is when someone is unfamiliar with certain processes in handling or shuffling or pitching the cards. A lot of the things, in order to pretty much be a good or successful poker dealer, you have to multitask. You have to be thinking about a multitude of things while unconsciously your body is doing other tasks. And it's only through the repetition, with the card mechanics, pitching, handling the cards on the table essentially becomes something you can do with your eyes closed. And eventually you're able to focus on other aspects of what you could be paying attention to, essentially multitasking. So am I thinking about that correctly in terms of what you're saying is like unconsciousness is kind of habit building. The habits become unconscious.
Yeah, to be honest, it's like the first step. Like again, going back to the shoe tying analogy, right? When we first start to learn to tie a shoe, we actually do have to do it kind of consciously. And then eventually over time, it starts to become more of like a habit. We're not really thinking about it. We're on more like on autopilot. Eventually, autopilot does turn more into even like a belief, right? Like that and it even really progresses eventually to an identity, right? Eventually you get to a place where you're like, I'm a poker dealer because I can do this thing.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, you know, when you're thinking about, is that the unconscious self, I would actually lean more from the perspective of, it definitely means that your unconscious mind is getting involved. If you're starting to do things more automatically, your unconscious mind is getting involved. Another analogy for this is like, I think I became the most aware of it when I learned how to juggle. I learned how to juggle when I was a kid in a dream. And I know that sounds strange, but I saw a circus magician performing at a town fair, and he could juggle and he could ride a unicycle and he did some magic tricks. And I watched him for maybe 10 minutes. I interacted with him for probably all of 10 minutes. But I watched him and I was like transfixed, hypnotized, mesmerized by this thing because it was so different, so unique. It was magnetic. And so when I went home, I was like, I got to do whatever that guy's doing. Like whatever that was, just got to figure that out. And so I went and I got 3 tennis balls. And I sat in my room, and for hours, I just tried to replicate what he was doing. I couldn't do it. Balls kept falling. And I'm thinking in my head the whole time, like, this dude must have been like a magician, you know? He's like, it's real magic. Like, how does this work? I'm trying, can't do it. Well, that night I went to sleep, and I dreamed that I could juggle. I had a full-on dream. It was so exciting. I had this incredible feeling. But in the dream, it was so detailed that I actually could see the path that the balls were taking. I could see them like almost in slow motion, like the path that they were taking and how they were falling, and I could see how it worked. Well, when I woke up in the morning, I literally could juggle. And then that continued to progress so that from that day forward, I didn't just learn to juggle, but I learned how to do all sorts of fancy patterns and all this different stuff. Within a couple months of juggling, though, I could easily sit there in the mirror and juggle on autopilot. I was not thinking about throwing and catching. I wasn't, throw. Nothing like that was happening. I was just doing it. And it was in that moment where I really realized like what the unconscious mind was. It was that I can observe myself doing something without being aware of how I'm doing it. I can observe myself even now snowboarding without being able to fully describe exactly how it is happening. Although, as you know, I'm the kind of person that likes to know how things work, so I can explain it to other people. But essentially, there's a lot of what I am doing while snowboarding where I know it's much more nuanced than the basics of getting somebody to that place. And in a lot of ways, I think my style of teaching has a lot to do with tricking people into a self-deception that makes them learn faster, right? One of the things that I always could do is help people learn how to get on a tight wire way faster than they would if they were to do it on their own.
Right.
And it's because I know what to tell them to focus on, and it helps skip them past the belief system stuff that would get them messed up if they try to do it on their own.
Yeah. I think the closest experience I could have related to that is, I wouldn't say I learned drums overnight, but I definitely practiced one evening for hours and hours, and I couldn't get this like technique down with my foot on the kick drum. And then the following day, woke up, didn't have a dream about it or anything, but I woke up and, had breakfast and then jumped back on the drum set, and then I was just able to do it. And then right at that point, I was able to, play the kinds of drums in the style that I always had wanted to play in.
Awesome.
But unfortunately, I didn't have a dream that kind of told me exactly, what to do with each body part and limb, and, but
this is very similar.
Awesome.
Yeah, very similar. And also, we all are governed by this like visual, auditory, kinesthetic system. So maybe in that context, I was more visual, but maybe you're operating from a different place. And so, I can remember seeing it, right? But maybe you were feeling it, or maybe you were hearing it, or there was something else going on.
Yeah. So you and I have traveled, several times together, and I've seen firsthand kind of the way you like to approach, challenges or stressful traveling situations. Do you think adventure sports like snowboarding or tight wire shape the way that you approach coaching or risk in life?
I mean, there's no doubt, like, a huge part of my life, even now to this day, is based around how to manage risk, as you've talked about. I'm a huge believer in taking on adventures, going on adventures. I always highly recommend people to do that, whatever that means in their life, right? So for some people, taking an adventure is like going to the supermarket, right? And for some people, taking an adventure is like going to the top of Mount Everest. It's like, it depends on what your level of adventure looks like. But getting into a position where you're willing to try something different, to me, is everything about why we're here. So again, not to get too deep or philosophical, but I'm very big into defining what I call usefulness. And what I mean by usefulness is that in terms of a construct of value, if people are going to talk about what's most valuable, the things that are most useful are the most valuable. And to me, being able to go on adventures is the most valuable because it opens up your mind to different perspectives. So it's kind of like when you're a kid and people say, like, you should travel because it'll open your mind up to different perspectives. Like, it's like that. But I think that most people need to realize that, like, you can go on that same adventure like today. In fact, you could do it right now by just going to a place that you've never gone to before, by doing a thing you've never done before, by trying a new activity, by learning a new language, by talking to a person you never had a conversation with before. It's all about how useful that is to open yourself up to this different perspective. So you might think to yourself, like, well, why is that a part of, like, risk management? Why is it, or how does that all interrelate? Or even, like, why is that so useful? Well, to me, the reason why it's so useful is because if everybody's doing the same thing, then essentially we are all sort of stuck here together. That there's probably not enough being put into understanding what creativity really is, why it's so useful, literally. I think one of the main kind of ideas to bring into this conversation is, like, I've consistently heard people talking about how, like, in public schools, especially, like, when the budget gets cut, the first thing they cut is, like, art and music and stuff like that. And then they really pump, like, we gotta focus on science. And I've always kind of scratched my head because once I've learned these ideas, I thought to myself, like, well, that's, like, backwards, completely backwards from what learning is, right? The idea of being able to actually learn is the concept of being able to move your mind into a position where it's willing to have a new idea, right? Practicing having a new idea. And if everybody's just learning the exact same ideas and doing exactly the same things, then nobody's learning. Everybody's just following orders. Everybody's just following along with the guy that came before them. And unless the guy that came before you is extremely successful, that means you're probably not going to be very successful. It probably means you're not going to have a great life. It probably means you're going to struggle and be trapped. And my opinion is that if we want more people to have good lives, if we want more people to be prosperous, and it doesn't matter where you are, if we want more people in your community to be able to get to a better place, then it's really those things. It's art and music, and it's the creative things that are going to move their mind into those places. So for me, the easiest way to get to those places is through adventure.
That was a great answer to that. All right, let's kind of get into closing. A few more questions. So if someone is completely skeptical of hypnotherapy, what's one simple exercise that they can try today that might change their mind?
Well, I think that if you've listened to this, that's one thing you could do. If you've listened to this podcast from the beginning to the end, I think you'll have a totally different perspective of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. I also recommend that you watch the demonstration that we're going to do and even go along with it because, whatever you hear me saying is exactly something that you could do yourself. So what I think that we can do right now, though, as a way to help move a person who's skeptical still into a position where they realize how safe this all is to bring us back to the idea that you're already hypnotized. And I want to bring us to a very simple idea about this level of hypnosis. So right now, there's a very good chance that you believe in something about your life. There's a very good chance that you believe something about your relationship, or that you believe something about your career, Maybe you even believe something about your community or about your world. And there's a very good chance that that thing that you believe in is limiting you completely. It has you stuck thinking that you can only make a certain amount of money, or you can only do a certain kind of thing, or you can only, your relationship is only this good or not good or whatever. And so if you're skeptical about hypnosis or hypnotherapy, I would question you to ask yourself, or I would ask you to ask yourself, how's that working out for you? Right? How's it working out for you to be stuck there? Right?
Yeah.
Is it putting you in a good place to keep yourself limited? Is it giving your kids a good opportunity to be open-minded or to be able to learn new things? Is it putting you in a position where you could have a great relationship? If you answer, yeah, it is, well, then great. There's no reason for you to be in a hypnotherapy session because your life is awesome.
Yeah.
But if you're not, it's very likely it's because you're stuck on a limiting belief. And the very, very simplest way to get rid of those limiting beliefs, the most direct way to do it, is by utilizing the understanding of hypnosis and hypnotherapy, which is to be able to pull you out of that hypnotic state that you're already in and move you into a state where you're going to be more successful.
Right. Okay. I mean, yeah, I completely get what you're saying, and I'm hoping that viewers and listeners also find that extremely valuable and useful. So, again, you being aware of many hats, if you had to only keep one and give the rest up, which would it be and why? I think I know the answer, but I'm asking it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on a long journey, which I intend to continue on. This adventurous journey that I'm on has, as you said, it's allowed me to wear lots of hats. It's allowed me to have a lot of relationships. Whenever I get an opportunity, I always try to present my gratitude for all the magical people that I've been in relationships with that have taught me so many incredible things about myself and the world. And so, when I look back, one of the things that's so important to reflect upon is that because I've become so interconnected with the world, I can't be a tight wire walker really anymore. I can't really be a magician anymore. I can't really be a project manager anymore. So even though I've worn those hats, and people would think like, well, you were all those things, right? You could do it. You did it once. You could do it again. The reality is, at this stage, at this place in my life, I am for sure best understood as a hypnotherapist. And the reason that I use that now is because it gives me such a wide umbrella of ways to communicate. And that's what I've now found to be the most valuable in my life, is understanding better ways of communication, understanding ways to utilize or leverage that communication in a variety of different capacities. So to me, understanding hypnosis and hypnotherapy is for sure the hat I wear, and I'm probably will be wearing that hat for a very long time.
Awesome. That wasn't my guess. My guess would have been something like an entrepreneur kind of hat, which kind of encompasses all those kind of things.
I was going to guess snowboarder.
Yeah. All right. What's one book, one habit, and one piece of advice that you'd recommend to anyone trying to improve their life today?
All right. One book, one habit.
Yeah. Now, I know you mentioned a book before.
Yep.
Could be the same book if you want to mention that one. But one book, one habit, one piece of advice.
Sure.
Today.
Yeah. So the book that I mentioned earlier, for sure, anybody that's interested in learning about like the placebo and the nocebo effect and all that's a great book. So just to say it again, Irving Kirsch's book, The Emperor's New Drug is great. It's very eye-opening as well. However, in terms of books that I continue to return back to, I think that any book that inspires you, any book that brings you a sense of peace or a feeling of peace that you can continue to go back to, that's the book I recommend that you read.
Okay.
Was the second thing an activity?
Habit.
Habit.
Could be activity.
Yeah, habit. Here's an interesting habit. I think that there's an intersection between your conscious mind and your unconscious mind that is dramatically overlooked, if not hidden, which is that you are breathing. And if you can consciously begin practicing breathing for just a short period of time every day, that one habit alone will improve your life more than anything else. So that would be the habit. My suggestion?
Do that habit.
Yeah. Yeah, my suggestion is kind of in line with that, which is my suggestion is that if you haven't yet begun the journey of aligning yourself with your unconscious mind, start as soon as you can. If this podcast can be the catalyst to doing it, awesome. But the sooner the better. Because the thing that's really holding everybody back is that they're in misalignment with their unconscious self. And if your unconscious self is processing billions of bits of information, and that's the thing that is antagonistic to you, you're probably going to have a really hard time. You're probably going to feel really bad about your life. You're probably going to struggle in your career. You're probably not going to have enough resources. And it's not going to have anything to do with the things that you are telling yourself, the stories you're saying. It's going to have everything to do with the fact that you're fighting an uphill battle against yourself. So my suggestion is to really seek that alignment.
Yep. All right.
Wait, I have a question. Do you meditate?
So I spent a lot of years learning how to meditate. The thing that I do now, I think most people would consider meditation, but it's breathing. So when a person comes to me now and says, like, do you think I should learn how to meditate? I tell them I think that they should learn how to breathe. If you learn how to breathe and you do it effectively, you will also simultaneously learn how to meditate. So there's no reason to learn how to meditate because then you haven't learned how to breathe. So I prefer that you just learn how to breathe.
And I think just to clear that up a little bit, when you say learning how to breathe, you're talking about conscious breathing, certain breathing pattern, like coherent breathing is something that is that you teach.
That's what
You don't have to explain it in detail unless you want to, but I figure that if someone reaches out to you and they want to, or they look it up online, that's kind of what you're referring to.
Correct. Yeah. So that they understand, because it's good to say that I'm obviously just jumping to saying, like, you just learn how to breathe. People are like, I am breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So I am referencing coherent breathing, specifically. And the reason why it's important to say that is because there are so many different kinds of breath work essentially that are out there that it gets confusing, and they're not all created equal. In fact, there's many. They do all sorts of different things. Some are energizing, some are relaxing.
Some make you pass out, like Wim Hof.
Yeah, some can make you pass out and see colors and stuff. Yeah. So what I'm suggesting that you use is the 6-6. Coherent breath, which means that you breathe in for 6 seconds and you breathe out for 6 seconds without a pause, and that the ultimate amount of time is about 20 minutes. So you do about 20 minutes of that breathing every day. If you were to take up that practice, it has incredible health benefits, both physical and mental, and also it has a lot of science and research to back it up because it's such a simple breathing technique to teach, but also turns out to be the best. So
yeah, cool. I think in terms of meditation or like just listening to this whole podcast straight through is going to feel like a hypno session, Yeah.
But, I mean, at this point, if anybody has been able to start this and get all the way to this point and you haven't fallen asleep yet, then kudos.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. And, let's just, I appreciate you very, very much for taking the time to come in today and doing this podcast with us.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, now I guess next up, we're going to prepare a little bit and get, which isn't going to take much, but we're going to set up whatever we need to set up to get Trey, I guess, ready for this hypno session.
Perfect.
All right, let's do it. Before we continue, a quick but important safety warning. The following hypnotherapy session may unintentionally induce deep relaxation or sleep to anyone listening. Therefore, it is recommended that you please ensure you are in a safe, stationary environment before continuing. Do not listen to or watch the upcoming hypnotherapy session while driving or operating any motor vehicle. Again, do not listen to the upcoming segment while driving. Your safety comes first. Listener discretion advised.
Okay, perfect. So we're gonna we want to start off for everybody that's listening and watching this to kind of frame this out a little differently than you would think about with a traditional hypnotherapy session. Because what I want to demonstrate today is a couple of things. So one of the things I want to demonstrate today is how deeply relaxed you can become, using hypnosis and hypnotherapy. So that's one of the things that we want to be able to demonstrate. One of the things we want to also be able to demonstrate, though, is how an idea can be totally changed or even erased. And also, we want to demonstrate a third thing, which is that sometimes, even just by listening to certain concepts or by hearing things or experiencing things in a certain way, it may affect your mind. Now, the reason why I want to go into these three topics specifically. So one is I want people to recognize how a hypnotherapy session is essentially like a mental massage, how it feels so good to be so deeply relaxed. And it's something that everybody should, have the opportunity to experience at some point. So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is I want to be able to show that, in fact, sometimes we can fully and completely disassociate. That's going to be one of the things. This isn't an exact science. So sometimes things work, sometimes they don't. We're going to see how it goes. But the third piece, in terms of seeing sort of the bigger, broader context of all this, I think that's also important for people to see. So that way they can start to kind of get their head wrapped around how this is really already happening in their own life, how there's these moments of disassociation and these moments of misunderstanding. So that's the frame to kind of think about this to start with. So Trey, if you're ready, all you have to do in order for this to work perfectly for you is really just listen to the sound of my voice. And for everybody at home, it's important for you also to recognize that if you begin to now listen to the sound of my voice, there's a very good chance that you will also become hypnotized. So the reason I'm saying that is if that you are currently driving a car, or if you are operating any kind of machinery or doing anything that you would not want to do while you're literally asleep, now is the time to stop listening to this recording and come back to it when you're lying in a bed or you're lying down in a comfortable position, because you will fall asleep. It's going to happen. That being said, if you are in a safe place and you can listen to this now, if you just listen to what I'm saying and you continue to go through that process, you will find yourself in a deeply relaxed place, and you will also have a really great experience. So that being said, in a moment, not yet, but in a moment, I will ask you to close your eyes if they haven't already closed. All right. And we're going to do exactly as we've done before. So you're just going to listen to the sound of my voice. And as you listen to the sound of my voice, I just want you to do as I do. I just want you to allow yourself to get into a state where you feel comfortable. So first, make sure that you feel comfortable the way you're sitting, that your feet are on the floor. That's right. That your hands are resting comfortably so that you feel good about it, that your body is aligned so that if you were to fall asleep right now, you would be fine. And so then what I want you to start to do is I just want you to start to take a nice deep breath in and then slowly exhale. That's right. And then take a deep breath. And slowly exhale. And if your eyes close for any reason, you can just allow them to stay shut. Just allowing you to go even deeper. Just nice deep breath. And then all the way out. Perfect. And you're just going to continue to breathe like this. Like I said, if your eyes do shut down, if they do close down, you can just allow them to stay shut. And the reason I'm going to allow you or to ask you to keep your eyes shut is because it does send a powerful signal to your body. That's right. It sends a powerful signal to your body. It's the same signal that you send to your body every night when it's time for you to fall asleep right now. And so every moment that your eyes remain shut, you'll allow yourself, just like you do each and every night, to sink down into the surface below you just a little deeper. That's right. That you'll allow yourself to breathe just a little slower. Just like you do each and every night, when you close your eyes, sink in deeper, and fall asleep right now. Now, as you continue to listen to the sound of my voice, as you allow yourself to continue to keep your eyes shut, not only will you become more deeply relaxed, but you'll also become more creative, more imaginative. Just like you do each and every night when you drift off and begin dreaming. And so right now, when you bring all of your awareness to the back of your eyelids, you can begin to imagine some colors. That's right. They may look like spots or shapes or after images. However you're imagining those colors, I just want you to know you're doing it perfectly. In fact, you are really good at doing this. It's almost as if you could imagine being like a small child. That you could imagine being filled with wonder and creativity. That you could imagine being filled with ambition. And that you could allow that to really sink in deeper. To allow it to sink in so deeply that it erases everything else. Just letting it go completely now. As if you were a small child, just fresh in the world, brand new. Just looking up into the sky and imagining a variety of things drifting through those beautiful clouds. All sorts of things, fun things, happy things. In fact, maybe the thing that makes you feel the most secure in your life is drifting through your mind's eye now. As if you could float back through time, or maybe forward through time. As if you could move through time as if time does not exist. Like a free spirit. Just allowing yourself to become like a magnet. To realize that for whatever reason, your ambition is growing, getting stronger. It's as if you've already climbed to the top of the highest mountain. In fact, you could imagine yourself there now, planting your flag, laying stake to your own claim. And maybe that's money, maybe it's success, or something else. But that ambition is growing. It's almost as if you could imagine now that because you've already made it to the top of the mountain, everything's just downhill from here. It's just easier and easier from here. That life is just getting better now. In fact, I want you to imagine exploring that part of yourself where life really is easy. Maybe it's feeling more ease in your relationships. Maybe you can imagine what it feels like to be in those relationships. Maybe they're romantic relationships, or maybe they're your work relationships. Maybe it's your relationship to money as your ambition is growing. That's right. Now, in a moment, not yet, but in a moment, I am going to snap my fingers. And when I do, you're going to come back into the room. Except, you're going to forget your name. In fact, I'm going to give you a new name now. Your name is Shakira. it'll be as though your old name has just disappeared. Take a moment and really just let that sink in for a moment. That in a moment, when you hear me snap my fingers, your old name will completely disappear, and your new name will come online. One, two, eyes open. Okay. So here we are. Is your name Shakira?
Yeah.
Interesting. It's a really cool name.
Thank you.
Yeah. I was wondering, like, is that like a family name?
I don't know.
Okay. Now here's the thing. I met this guy the other day. His name's Trey. Do you know who that is? No. Your name's not Trey, though, right?
Uh-uh.
Interesting. So you're Shakira.
Yeah.
Yep. How about this? I'm just curious, if we go on from there, in a moment, for any reason whatsoever, if your eyes close, I just want you to allow yourself to go back into a state of sleep. That's right, all the way down, just deeper and deeper, just allowing yourself to go back to that same place, to that wonderful place right at the top of the mountain. Any of the suggestions that I've given you up until this point, you can just clear them away from your mind. In fact, you can just allow them to go all the way. In a moment, I will snap my fingers again, and you can come back into the room, and you'll remember very easily, very clearly, that your name is Trey. But you will forget completely that you ever even said the name Shakira. That won't even be like it existed. Because you'll be able to use all of your creativity, all your intelligence. You'll be able to prove not only to yourself, but to everyone, that level of creativity and intelligence is extremely high. As you allow your imaginative mind to take over, your unconscious mind to take over. So that you can allow yourself to completely go into a place where you are fueling your ambition. Whether that means money, or maybe it means something else to you. Now, in a moment, I will snap my fingers, and you can come back just allowing yourself to feel really good, to feel really amazing. Now, at the beginning of this process, I did ask you to think of a word. And so I just want you to get that word that you're thinking of clearly in your mind. We actually wrote it down. We put it in a little envelope. And I just want you to get that word clear in your own mind so that way we can make this work for you. What I want you to imagine is whatever that word was in your mind, I want you to imagine that it's now written on a blackboard. Or maybe it's a whiteboard. But I want you to imagine that you are erasing that name now. That name is erasing completely from your mind. And that there's something else now appearing there. But you won't know what that is until you hear Frank say it out loud. When Frank says it out loud, you'll think to yourself, that's interesting. Take a moment to let that sink in. One, two, eyes open. Okay, so everything back to normal. So let's just take a moment. Trey, right? Okay, cool. Back to normal. Just feeling absolutely the way it was. And how about you, Frank? Just so we can have everybody feeling normal, back to normal.
I feel relaxed, but yeah, normal.
Okay, feeling relaxed. And let's talk about that for a minute, just before we even get into this other piece. Trey, as you went through that process, I know that we were kind of opening up a big understanding here between me and you about like what mind control possibly could be. And that's a bigger, broader conversation. Maybe we can even all come back to this conversation again. Maybe we'll make some more videos about the real reality of what it is. But in this context, when your eyes closed and you drifted into that imaginative place, could you visualize yourself on the mountain? Could you feel yourself on the mountain? Was there anything about that you could viscerally bring yourself to, where you did feel like you're at the top of this?
Yes.
Okay. And also, Frank, at the beginning, just so we know, we kind of all did this together. So just so kind of like it's all on the up and up. We essentially just like had a little card that we chose a word.
Mm-hmm.
For the very first time, just so that we're all together about it, what is the actual word that we put into this envelope here?
Money. The word is money.
The word's money?
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? Because, money has a lot to do with what most people are thinking about in these situations. And what most people don't understand is how powerful hypnosis is in the construct of what we all want to believe in, what we all want to know, or what we want to understand. Now, at the very beginning, and I'm going to see if Trey will back me up on this, I asked Trey if he would participate in a process with me that would allow us to use a different kind of hypnosis. And so, Trey, would you do me a favor? Can you go in there and that envelope, there is a card. We all saw it. Before you take it out of there, though, if you were to tell me what word we had erased from your mind, what word is it? Okay. So at the very beginning, when we went through this process, we do know that we did put a card in there, though, right?
Yes.
Okay. In your mind, in your memory, is it the word money?
No.
No. But you're sure it's money, right?
Yes.
Are you positive?
Positive.
Okay. So at the beginning, like right now, you remember beyond a shadow of a doubt the feeling, the sensation, even the visualization. You can see the word money in your mind.
I saw it on the card, yes.
100%.
That 100%, that's what I saw.
And yet, in your experience, and from what we talked about, we set this up in a way to know that as we went through this experience together, that we would influence Frank to say the word money. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he has said the word money, because the actual thing, the word that we actually all saw, the one that we agreed upon, is a different word. What word is in there? Money. Interesting. Look at that. Not ambition? Okay. Perfect. And so this is the construct of mind control. Can you now describe to everybody, as they watched you go through this, how weird it feels to remember something that has not happened?
Yeah, it's weird.
Even the words, as I was describing it to you, leading up to that point, it really did seem like Frank was wrong.
Yes.
That he was going to have an experience, right? But you had an experience.
Yes.
What does it feel like?
You don't know what's real.
Okay. Well, this is the power of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. This is exactly the three things that I outlined at the very beginning. So just bring us all back to that, right? It's the ability to allow ourselves to feel like we've had that mental massage. So can you attest to how that feels, that it feels good to sink into our body and that you do, in fact, feel like you got a mental massage?
Yes.
Okay. And the second part is realizing that we can, at some level, really change and update ourselves, that we can go through a process where things get a little blurry and we can update ourselves into new things. And the third piece being that we can really, in fact, change what we had perceived, that there's really a level of erasing the past and rewriting it into the future. I think we've done a good job demonstrating that, so that's pretty much it for today.
Awesome. Thank you again, Justin. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I feel like I just woke up from like a rejuvenation nap.
That's the best feeling. All right. Gonna turn this off. Thanks everyone again for watching. Hope you didn't fall asleep and crash your car. So,
Yeah.
there was a disclaimer.
Perfect.
Thanks for hanging out and watching the show. If you enjoyed it, please take a moment to subscribe. With a simple click of a button, your support will help us create future content for you and others to enjoy. Let's keep this thing rolling so we can keep bringing you more stories, laughs, and maybe a little wisdom. Thanks again.